Okay, so today we are looking at EQ1 from price stability tutorial. And I'm going to combine the two videos, one for EQ1 and then the other one for CSQ3, the higher order questions, into this particular video so that this can help you prepare for your tutorial. So let us first look at our very first EQ1. Okay, and let us have a look at the preamble. So what we understand, basically the preamble shares with us a bit of information. So telling us in the time period of September 2013, MAS, all right, which is your central bank, noted that inflation expected to rise moderately. So they gave a few reasons, okay, as to why this is so. So one of the reasons given was basically strong GDP growth in Q2 of 2013 due to increased output in the manufacturing and trade-related sector. All right, although with a slowing of growth in private consumption. All right, and other than that, there was also expected to be strong wage pressure from persistent tightness in the labor market caused by shortages in the labor supply, accompanied by steady expansion in demand for goods and services from US, Japan, and the Eurozone. All right, so with this, all right, the preamble basically gives you some of the relevant points that you can use, okay, to basically explain your Part A question. Part A requires you to look at how the above mentioned factors can cause the rate of inflation to rise in Singapore. All right. So command word here, I think quite clear. We are all very familiar with. It's basically explained. All right, and I think what they want you to talk about here are your factors affecting your inflation. Context is in the case of Singapore. So as per what we have seen earlier, okay, you can see two very clear reasons that come about. All right, so before we go into greater detail, okay, we want to talk about what inflation is. So inflation basically sustained increase in your GPL. All right, increase in your GPL, and the inflation here can be categorized into the two types, which are your demand pull and your cost push inflation. All right, so I think you can see quite clearly the evidence that is provided. It gives a good balance of both lah. All right, strong GDP growth is very much related to your demand pull. All right, the part about tightness and the wage pressure is very much related to your cost push. Okay, I think there's something wrong with the. All right, it's very much related to your cost push. And last but not least, the expansion in demand for goods and services from US, Japan, and Eurozone. Basically, what has happened is that in US, Japan, Eurozone, there was the recovery. This was sometime in 2013. So the subprime crisis, Eurozone crisis, etc., all happened around 08, 09, right? And then in 2013, you started to see signs of recovery and basically increase in demand for goods and services from these countries. So that means that they are buying more and more imports. Buy more imports, which are the exports from Singapore lah. So all this will also lead to your demand pull inflation. All right, so basically, part A, very simple, very straightforward. Okay, you can identify either points for the demand pull inflation that I mentioned earlier. All right, and you can also talk about the cost push inflation. Okay, and then basically you just conclude to say that, okay, these above mentioned points are the reasons as to what caused inflation rate to rise in Singapore. So part A, very, very straightforward. If you have questions, do let me know. I'll now move on to part B of the question. So part B is discuss whether exchange rate appreciation remain the most important policy instrument controlling rate of inflation in Singapore. So I believe by now you should be very familiar with Singapore's exchange rate policy, which is and our stance of a modest gradual appreciation. All right, so we try to achieve economic growth and price stability. Okay, AG plus price stability using this modest gradual appreciation. So in controlling rate of inflation, will this exchange rate appreciation remain the most important policy? So as we have mentioned earlier, your inflation here can be demand pull, can be cost push. So in addressing whether, okay, can it be the most important policy instrument, we need to ask ourselves, okay, since we have already identified earlier in part A that there were uh, two different factors affecting demand pull, cost push, inflation in Singapore, we now have to then look at, okay, based on these two factors, would the exchange rate appreciation be considered to be the most important policy? Will it be adequate or will it be able to address the both the demand pull and the cost push side of this inflation in Singapore? All right. So if you do a quick question analysis, okay, basically this question here is more of a macro policy type of question. Do we need to bring other policies? All right, let's look at the question again. Whether exchange rate appreciation should remain the most important. So exchange rate appreciation should remain the most important. That is your thesis. Your antithesis, it should not be the most important. So therefore, there is that room, there's scope for you to basically talk about other policy, other possible policies. And basically reasons why you think exchange rate appreciation should not be the most important policy. Okay, so if we look at exchange rate appreciation, what does exchange rate appreciation do? Basically, exchange rate appreciation, it makes your price of exports to be more expensive in foreign currency, price of imports to be relatively cheaper in local currency. So this will have impact on your X minus M, assuming Marshall-Lerner condition. X minus M will fall and your AD will fall. So if it's demand pull, this will help to rein in the increase in AD lah. All right. And then the part about cost push. So earlier we mentioned that one of the reason here is because of the strong wage pressure lah. So cost push, inflation, your strong wage due to strong increase in wages, etc. Will your exchange rate appreciation actually help or not? That's the question that you need to think about lah. All right. So basically, what you need to do, you need to talk about the policy, HEL, how it works, effectiveness of policy, the limitation of exchange rate policy, possible other policies that you can actually bring in. So earlier we mentioned because your wage pressure, because of your wage, possible other policies, what kind of other policies? It's not just limited to fiscal and monetary. Supply side policy could also be considered. All right, supply side policy, because if it's wage reasons, how can we control or rein in this increase in your wages, your cost of production? All right, so evaluating, you need to then see whether, okay, piecing the various points together, would exchange rate appreciation be the most important policy or not? All right, you can say yes, it's the most important policy. Why? Elaborate. Okay, but as you know, policy question, usually what we do, we advocate for a combination of policy. Do provide reasons why you advocate for a combination of policy. Don't just say, oh, a combination of policy would be best. Full stop. Okay, because what we want you to do is to basically support your answer. So you can also talk about how, given like what you mentioned in part A, that there are two separate factors, two very distinct factors, right? The two different root causes of your inflation, and one policy may not be adequate or sufficient enough to basically address the root cause in these two factors. So therefore, a combination of policies. So you don't just use one policy. So use exchange rate policy and perhaps your supply side policies together. I would actually prefer supply side policy here lah. Okay, so please ignore this part. All right. Conclusion, like what we mentioned, advocate for a combination of policy. All right, and then talk about why that is that should be the case. Okay, and then yeah, other considerations that you want to take into account as to determining, okay, what is your way of ranking lah, whether it should remain the most important or not. It could be in terms of speed, how fast the policy work. This one is working faster than the rest. How much outlay from the government? Does the government have to spend any amount of money? Things like that, okay, that you can also add on as part of your evaluation in order to consider whether it should be the most important policy or not. Okay, so I hope EQ1 you should be able to do both part A, part B because I believe this question is very, very straightforward. This is one of the easiest A-level question. All right. Now I move on to CSQ3. CSQ3 of your price stability tutorial. All right. So as per what we have always been doing, I'm going to focus more on the question analysis for the higher order questions. All right. So if we look at your part 2 of your 8-mark question, oh no, part 2, basically the 8-mark question of your case study. All right. The question here is about whether Vietnamese government's approach here is sufficient to better inflation. So if you do a quick question analysis, this is what you see lah. Okay, you need to discuss whether is it sufficient. The approach. Take note down here is approach. So the approach here involve your policies lah. So are the policies here, the approach that's undertaken by the government, sufficient? So thesis here will be sufficient, antithesis here will be insufficient. All right, and then you will talk about why that is the case lah. So if you look at extract 4, you can identify from extract 4 what the approach is as well as what the policies are. So if you look at extract 4 paragraph 2, down here what they mention, they talk about how the State Bank of Vietnam, which is Vietnam's central bank, okay, what they have done is that they have increased their interest rates. Key rates here is the interest rate lah. Increased interest rate to how many percent? 14%. To 14%, okay? And this is the latest in a flurry of increases. So this means that this is not the first time that they have actually increased their interest rate. All right. And campaign was accompanied by a package of commitments to tighten money and credit and cut the budget deficit. So other than just increasing interest rate, the government, okay, has also make a commitment to basically cut down on the government budget deficit. So if you recall, government budget is your government spending minus your government revenue lah. So these are mostly your taxes. This one is your expenditure plus your transfer payment. So when you have a government budget deficit, that means they are actually overspending lah. So they are spending more than what they are receiving actually. So the government is planning to do these two policies. So this one is basically what we call a contractionary monetary policy. This one down here is a contractionary fiscal policy lah. All right. So are these policies actually sufficient or not? You need to do the HER, how the policy work. Okay. Evaluate, all right, how is it effective, and then talk about the limitation. All right. And then as we mentioned, it's not sufficient. So your antithesis is not sufficient. So perhaps you want to propose other alternative policy. So you want to go back and look at what the huge issue, what the issues here are. All right, and then address them accordingly. Okay, so they mention about things such as recent increase in power, fuel, and high coal price as well. What they did, they actually devalued their currency as well. So perhaps you might want to look at supply side policy or even your exchange rate policies. So these are things that you can talk about in order to talk about whether policies are sufficient. So as always, policy, we always advocate for combination. Do explain why that is the case. Okay, so this one should be very straightforward and I think should be able to be done. Now let's move on to the last question. So to what extent do you agree with the view that Singapore's nipping foreign labour inflow policy may warrant a review? So as per what we have discussed previously, Singapore has taken a tighter foreign worker policy, right, restricting the inflow, restricting the entry of foreign labour. So down here, this question here, to what extent do we agree that this policy here requires a review? So if you look at your various extracts, I think some of the extracts basically show you that you know, with the implementation of this foreign worker uh, quota, your levies, etc., it has started to create quite a fair bit of problems, rising cost of production, right? Producers, employers facing issues, facing concerns, etc. So therefore, this question here asks us whether does the government need to see whether this needs to be reviewed or not. So it's really looking at the effectiveness of this policy, and not just looking at that, but also seeing whether there is a need for this policy to be changed or not. So where can we find our answer? If you look at your extracts, your extracts actually provide quite a fair bit of answer. Alright, but before we move into the answer, let's look at how we form our thesis. Thesis statement will be Singapore nipping foreign policy requires a review. So it warrants a review. Antithesis does not warrant. So you talk about why it's actually good or why we should hang on, persevere, etc. Alright, so if you look at extract 1, you can find in extract 1 there are certain evidences, okay, that highlights how the policy here, this nipping foreign worker inflow policy, has actually led to increase in cost of production, resulting in the inflation rates increasing. Okay, so down here they say inflation likely to rise further in the wake of higher manpower costs. All right, so down here it further identify how it has actually led to this and the effect on wages. All right, how there's a continuous increase in this increase in wages. All right, and what we are seeing is yes, wages are increasing, but productivity has been weak. All this means that your unit labor cost, your COP here, will increase. All right, all this affects your inflation. So because of this reason, contributing to inflation, that's why we are suggesting that perhaps Singapore government might want to review this foreign worker inflow policy because of the issues that it has brought about based on extract 1. So this is part of your thesis lah. Okay, extract 2 also talks about some example. So the tightening here is creating significant strain and eroding the cost competitiveness. So higher labor costs, it is not just an effect domestically, it can also affect externally lah. All right, because what happens here is that higher costs, Singapore may be less attractive as a investment hub. And all this can create certain concerns, at least from the government's perspective. Okay, and not just that, if you look at what is happening, the scenario, okay, we are actually seeing, okay, at that point in time, not now, but at that point in time, we're actually having what we call a stagflation. Okay, because down here they say technical recession is looming. So this suggests that you are experiencing negative economic growth. Negative economic growth plus inflation. Okay, basically stagflation is either negative economic growth or stagnant. That means zero or very small amount of growth. Plus this problem of inflation basically give us this whole condition known as stagflation. Just now we mentioned we have inflation, and right now economic situation, I mean, if inflation, as we have mentioned before, if it's actually small increase in inflation actually suggests that economy is growing because it could likely be demand pull. All right, but when we have inflation, but the economic growth is actually stagnant or even negative, then this suggests that it's not that desirable. So because of this, perhaps what we are suggesting here is that this will be used as ammo, as point to suggest that Singapore need to review the policy. Okay, extract 3 down here talks further about how, okay, yes, the government is aware of all of this. The government is aware. And basically, why or what's the whole intention or what's the whole rationale of this foreign worker labor inflow policy is really to try to get companies to boost productivity and not rely on low cost foreign labor. Because what we have been doing across the past few years is that companies they have taken the easy way out lah. They actually choose to hire more workers, more low cost workers, instead of looking for ways to help try to boost productivity. And that is not what the government wants. So that is not what the government wants. So because of that, we are suggesting that perhaps Singapore does not need a review, because instead of asking the government to change this policy, perhaps the employers, the producers, what they should do, they should change their mindsets. Okay, they should embrace this restructuring process. They should embrace this restructuring process and try to find ways to boost their productivity. Because the government is actually actively supporting all small SMEs, alright, who are willing to upgrade as as long as they want to upgrade lah. So they are providing all the funds lah. Okay, they had the PIC, Productivity Innovation Credit scheme, that and they also have all your tax exemption or even tax reduction, those kind of various schemes that help companies that try to boost productivity. So what the government really wants to do here is really get producers, get the employers to change mindsets. Okay, don't just think of taking the easy way out, depend on your low-cost foreign worker, because that's not going to solve the issue or the problem. So therefore, this will be part of your antithesis to say that it does not warrant a review. Okay, and if we go back to extract 1, you can see last paragraph. It says that yes, inflation is caused by your policy, but it's not just that alone. Okay, you can see here, imported inflation is also happening, basically because of costlier food. So Singapore, as you know, we import a lot of our raw material, even our food source, etc. So this in itself, okay, is actually part of the reason why inflation rates have been increasing. So therefore, perhaps we want to also look at the fact that this could be part of the transition period, okay, and that inflation here is not just caused solely and due to your foreign labor inflow policy, but also other reasons as well. So therefore, because of this, it does not warrant a huge review. Okay, so as I mentioned, okay, thesis we will talk about why and how other objectives can be affected. Okay, all this basically you can find in our what I've gone through with you. Okay, so conclusion, whether it needs to be reviewed or not, you really need to weigh the cost and the benefit of this policy. All right, talk about reason why you think they should review or why they should not review. It's up to you to argue which way, as long as you substantiate it accordingly. Make sure you use sound economic concepts to support your reason. Okay, so I hope this video will be helpful to you as you do your tutorial, and if, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know.